Dzień dobry. Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Ja się nazywam Agnieszka Drutkiewicz.
My name is Agnieszka Drutkiewicz, and I will have the pleasure to moderate today's meeting at the Institute of Goethe. We have just screened the Food Generations movie as part of Kultursymposium Weimar.
Spotykam się z
And today, my guests are co-creators.
która przygotowała wspólnie ten film ze
I'm
Sebastianem.
afraid there are some technical issues.
Która dodała piękne animacje. Monika jest znaną bardzo food writerką.
She is a very well-known food writer and culinary curator. She has also authored a lot of different events and trips, everything connected with food.
Jedzenia.
Everything connected with Polish food, that's her. Ola Wasilewska is great when it comes to illustration for poetry. She creates animations and creates wonderful works that combine motion and word. So we know that Polish poets, male and female, owe a lot to Ola and her imagination. So remaining with this metaphor of the table, I would like to ask you, what do you think? What grandparents and grandchildren alike can bring to the table, to the common table? What can they bring, what they can give? What can they learn from each other? Okay, first of all, I would like to welcome everyone. I am happy that we have come to the point of being able to show this film. And Agnieszka, thank you very much for starting with the metaphor of the table, because we are not at the table, we are not sitting at the same table. It would have been different had it been in different times. Also, the persons whom we met while making the movie, they either saw each other for the very first time since the pandemic had broken out. Sometimes they are in touch, and sometimes they don't stay in touch. So we actually brought the table to them by inviting them to this project. What they bring themselves. This means that's very simply put, but the grandma, for example, brings herself, her skills, her experience. You can tell by the hands because they are making everything so skillfully. And then the children need to learn. They are not so nimble, but the young persons, they bring new vibrations. So what I felt during these meetings was that these people support each other enormously. So whether it is a grandson or a granddaughter, they also give the purpose of life, the sense of living. The conversations were really moving. For example, I invited these people to a very open conversation, such as, what does it mean that I am your grandson? Usually it doesn't happen spontaneously ad hoc. So I believe that thanks to that, it was possible to see that relationship, but also to see what both sides bring into the relationship. So that is the question, what we bring to that metaphorical table. So Monica, it's worth inviting you into our homes to learn something about our families. Good evening. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you. Thank you for this invitation, and I am really happy that I was able to prepare all of the animations, all of the writing, whether at the beginning, during the film, and also at the end of it. And I was really happy that I could work remotely on the project, and I am connecting up with you from Budapest tonight. So this table, this wider Zoom table, is really pleasant for me because it allows me to meet up with you. And when it comes to your question, Agnieszka, I believe that different generations can bring different things. They can be pleasant and unpleasant. We could see in the film today very pleasant, very deep conversations about relationships, about bonds. And I believe that this is what Monica was looking for in these families. Monica, you wanted to really capture it, to show it, and to convey it, to really show it to all of us. One of the characters in the film, one of the grandmothers, stated that this is something that runs in every other generation. Every other generation enjoys cooking, has the knack for it. And I believe that somehow it is true in life. But I would like to ask you a question connected with that statement. What do you think? How different the relationship between grandparents and grandchildren is compared with the relationship to parent-child relationship? Would you agree that most often, although sometimes it happens that grandparents bring up the grandchildren for some reasons, but if that is not the case, then the relationship is actually different, because that means that the less pleasant aspects, such as school, health issues, and all everyday problems, they are somewhere on the side, but that also influences the relationship. What do you think? So it is the question of what it means in a given culture to be the grandmother or granddad.
I think moving on to the other generation will give you a brand new perspective. Normally, your grandparents have been brought up in a totally different culture. They come to the world that does not exist yet. The parents and the grandparents stem from a totally different era. And I think that this is extremely precious to sense this kind of a distance, which parents don't necessarily have as the grandparents do. Like you said, it's about certain sense of responsibility and requirements or demands. Sometimes a parent behaves like a soldier who only gives orders at home. And I can speak the same about my own children. The relationship with the grandma is really quite beautiful. It's actually moving. It's about assisting the person who is passing away, and this other person assists someone, accompanies someone who is just entering the world. And I think this is really beautiful. It's very well planned, I would say. It's well designed that the representatives of these two generations can reap benefits from that relationship. You said that it strikes you as a lighter relationship because you don't have the same demands towards your grandchildren as you do towards your own children. Well, grandma does not focus that much. She's there to cheer you up, to comfort the child, to support the child.
nie jest to jej zmartwienie,
And
prawda? Wszystkie sprawy
she
takie życiowe właśnie.
is not concerned directly with these daily affairs. So if all this is well arranged, which is the case in the families that we visited, these families proved to have very
Moim zdaniem
affectionate relationship. And I think that this is a great treasure for both sides of that relationship. Well, indeed, it seemed to be quite a great choice of activities. When you told me before about the film, when we met up to work on the post-production with Sebastian Juszczyk, for example, the cameraman, post-production and bringing all of it together, it struck me that you would say that these are matrilinear stories, that the families that you met are grandmas that pass on to the new generation of children. For example, the recipe for that most spectacular dish, but it's actually more about the relationship full of love and spending time together. And these are grandparents and not children, not daughters. It's not a film about mothers and daughters. It's a different setup. I think with mothers and daughters, there would be more tensions. There wouldn't be that much of this relaxed atmosphere and pure pleasure of being together, even though you can sense at times, well, I was not there present, but when I watched the film, I did notice that the grandparents said, okay, okay. The concentration, the suspense until the grandma finishes finally what she's saying. You can see a difference in the pace between the generations, the pace of speaking, the pace of thinking about different concepts. Well, I think it's about learning what respect is. After all, your grandma speaks slowly, but there was a time when you could not say a word, or you also spoke very slowly and your grandma was there. And I think that this is a great truth of life. Actually, it was our intention to show that we are not this wise people who know everything. We rather wanted to invite someone who feel like showing or exposing a certain truth about their relationship. And therefore, I would like to thank the grandmas and the grandchildren and all the persons involved in this project under the circumstances of COVID-19. We had to try at least to follow certain epidemiological measures, and the ladies were perfectly prepared. Actually, all of them were so open to talk about these relations, and to me, the questions were very deep. Young persons were asked to pose very deep questions to grandmas. Talking about the pace, after watching the film for the first time, it occurred to me that one of the characters says, well, what is most precious is the time spent together. And I think when today we are able to meet in a virtual way with the internet. So, well, without the internet, I don't know whether we would have been able to survive this
Wydaje mi się, że ważne jest tu w
pandemic.
kontekście tego, o czym rozmawiamy, że to jest czas
What I
offline.
think
Że
is
to jest
important
czas,
is that
gdzie
this is
to
the
właśnie tam
time
nie sprawdza
spent
tak bardzo tych
offline,
SMS-ów, wiadomości i
where
tak
you
dalej.
are not
I
plugged
teraz, żeby
to
wrócić jeszcze
your
do tego tematu,
smartphone that
no to wiadomo,
much.
że
And talking
jakby
about the pace,
urządzeń, to jest już coś, z czym
using devices is something that children seem
my im
to
nie
come to the world with. And even my generation can barely match this in the new generation, let alone a grandma. But on the other hand, there is this other function that Monica mentioned. Time is about repeating a certain gesture several times. And this slow pace, both the pace and being slow, can have some positive value. And you can see that precisely in the meeting of these generations. What do you think about this? Well, people have different gifts, don't they? I mentioned one of the ladies who was able to prepare thousands of pierogi in her life, and her children were only learning how to do that. There was also great admiration for grandmother, for her skills, for her culinary skill. They are great at using smartphones, but if you talk about crafts, in fact, you need more skills than just a nimble thumb. You need to have a certain sense. Well, people would check with their finger the dough to know when the dough was ready. And there are no clear rules. Sometimes you have a different type of flour, and you need to have this certain gift in your fingers. All such skills, the offline skills, these crafts, seem to now be ever more popular in the times of the pandemic. I mean, I do have friends who like to knit, but these crafts these days seem to be particularly appealing. The fact that you are able to do something manually, like a craftsman. On the other hand, there is this rush when you are young. And I can recall very well a sentence that someone said, which is so great about young people, that someone just sat on a horse and would go in all directions at once. And I think it really is the best expression of what it means to be young. It's not about doing one particular thing at a time, but it's rather about trying out different things at the same time, maybe. So the pace is a reaction to certain stimuli. Young people react to stimuli in a totally different way. They don't select the stimuli that much as the elderly. And therefore, I think both sides have a chance to learn from each other. And what young people need most, in my opinion, is a certain support. It's a certain sense of being part, being embedded in their own culture and family. Such questions can be posed and maybe answered at meetings, offline meetings. Where do I come from? It might seem that the question where I'm heading for is most important for young people, but the question where I come from is also quite significant in setting your direction for the future. Yes, but well, the answer might not be very pleasant sometimes. That's a different story. Well, I think that pleasure is can be defined in different ways.
Yes, but I also thought about the touch and also being nimble, being deft. That is also a sensory experience. This is something completely different than touching the keyboard, for example. So this also is a stimulus for the development of a different part of our person as a person than just the thumb or the index finger. However, I also would like to stir you a little bit. I would like to ask you about the filling. What you have in the filling of different dumplings, because there's the whole array of fillings. That's really interesting, of course, as well. But my thinking is that this filling, this can cause different contradictory feelings, because you've got the support, you've got the knowledge, you have the experience, but also I would say it's pleasant, but that's a bit of a euphemism, because not always something that we inherit within the family is good for us. I know that sometimes it can be a bit toxic, painful, unpleasant, and Ola mentioned that if it were a film about mothers and daughters, there would have been probably more tension. And that is true, because the kitchen is a field, is a ground where you have some hierarchy. And I think that I'm speaking too much at the moment, but really, I would like to stir the pot here, and I would like to ask you about your pierogi filling. Are they bio? Are they organic? What are they like? When it comes to the filling for pierogi, for our dumplings, Monica, you have to speak your mind. Well, I measure the reality. My criterion for the reality is that reality is always right. Things happen, and it is true that sometimes people do things that really hold us. Something that causes us to freeze, that can even really make us stop and captivate us. But some training can really come in useful, because the training in quick reactions can be very good for us, because we don't know what is good after all. Is there such a thing as an ideal childhood, ideal relationships? And we can see today on Facebook, for example, because you have got all of those photographs with your mother, but some people also write that they had a difficult childhood. So we also need to look at ourselves, what we are like. Would I have been different had something not happened? We don't know. And what Ola mentioned about the mothers, because of course these children also have mothers, so they were mentioned as well. And we could see that also the grandma has certain expectations regarding her daughter, whereas she doesn't have the same expectations at all towards her grandchildren. So we can see that tension is an element of life, and I don't quarrel with that anymore. Of course, there are different situations that are pathologic. Sometimes we really have to clarify certain things. We also have to stop treating a child who is an adult as a child. This is also about setting borders, setting your limits. I prepared a material about a Polish mother, that she has the power and she can also abuse this power. So if anywhere in the world you see a woman who is running with a banana after her child, it's certainly a Polish mother. There are no other nations who would do that. When it comes to food, there is a lot of control, there is a lot of power, and there is even abuse. So there are different elements that, according to my life experience, can become very creative if you really work them through, if you do something with them that can be painful. It may be painful, but it can really help you develop. And if we think about the filling itself, then we have different recipes. We are going to collect them in writing. We do have them because these ladies shared their recipes with us. But it is also true, every lady has a different recipe, they are different approaches, and then there's a different filling as well. And that is when you leave this psychological part aside. But filling is something that is unlimited. There's an unlimited number of recipes. Well, immediately when you mentioned this Mother's Day that we celebrate in Poland today, it actually was a moment of trauma for me, because just before our meeting, I read a poem by a poet who is also a psychologist. And so she's asking, should we feel guilty when we have something that is not positive towards our mother, that, for example, we don't feel gratitude for bringing us up, looking after us, for helping us move from childhood to adulthood. But I don't think that this film is about traumas. I would also like to refer to what you said, Monika, those Polish mothers that maybe have this label that they overfeed their children. So in Poland, very often, it was called Yiddish mama, and in Hebrew, you've got Polonia, the Polish mother. So maybe this stereotype, it is just a stereotype that we have. In other cultures, we may see it differently. Maybe we just look at mothers that overfeed their children or have the fixation on food, but maybe all mothers do that, maybe not. But at some point during the film, one of the grandmothers talks about the mother, yes, and then you know, or did you know that your mom doesn't do it this way, so she doesn't do it traditional, yeah, the traditional way, she does it differently because she's lazy? And the grandma says, no, because your mom doesn't prepare pierogies, not because she's lazy, but because grandma brings the pierogi. When I thought about dumplings, pierogi, I also thought about a phenomenon that was pretty much present in the media, and this was about the people who come to Warsaw from the countryside, from other cities. They come to Warsaw and they bring a lot of food in jars, and this is why they were referred to as słoik, jar. So I believe that this is pretty pejorative, because this is not a person from our city. But when you think about big cities, most of the time, these are people who come from outside of the urban areas. These are the people who want to make it. They are willing to make it work. They are willing to work hard and bring changes. And I thought about this słoik person, the jar. Then maybe that is also connected. So yes, I am trying to stir the pot, but also we have to remember not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And yes, I am now using different idioms, but it is all connected. That, for example, yes, we look after our child. We don't want to eat out. We don't want to spend that money on takeaways and eating out. That is healthy food as well. So this was a sociological association that, Monica, maybe that is something that is really colorful, not just look at the dark side at Frida, for example, and I don't know which book that was, that the mother is piercing the daughter with the fat in the dishes she serves. Well, certainly you have got this bad mother or bad stepmother who is giving the poisoned apple. Of course, you can look at it from Freud's point of view, that the child is trying to assimilate those difficult points, but needs to somehow deal with it. But when it comes to those who come from outside of Warsaw, they are called jars, słoik. But in such a jar, you bring to Warsaw, of Wrocław, to any big city, you bring in that jar more than food. You bring a piece of your home. It contains that energy. Somebody gives you that energy. In culture.pl, I also published an article that, you can also exchange food in jars also during the pandemic times, because you can leave a jar with food outside of somebody's door. So it is very important, not just for your body, but also for the soul. And so in New York, I also ran a program and we talked about jars, and Olga Budzan prepared wonderful, absolutely wonderful pieces of art. That was really beautiful, and you could stitch that as well. And this was something that brought those jars, słoiks, from Poland to New York. So I'm sure that, there are people who came over to the United States without maybe a physical jar, but they also do have such a jar, so to speak, because we also keep up the memory of certain traditions from home. And of course, there is this simple explanation. To make it cheaper, you are going to bring your goulash or different soups from your small town or village into a big city. But I am a bit naive sometimes, and I believe that this is also the energy of the house. This is a part of your identity. Do not forget who you are, because through cuisine, through food, people identify themselves, they build their identity. You also get to know other people. And so before a young person starts going out in the city and just try out everything that's available, in this jar, there's also the care about that person remembering who they are. And I convinced that the energy that people bring, whether foreigners or people coming from small towns and villages into big cities, this is the yeast that is able to bring energy and growth. And it can be Warsaw and it can be in New York. But in New York, actually, you become a New Yorker once you arrive there. And in Warsaw, you have to live there for 3 generations in order to become Warsawian.
Right, we talked about the influx of people, especially to Warsaw. So it struck me when I was coming to Warsaw, the delicacies that I was bringing to Warsaw with me when returning from my family home, and actually I got hungry. Well, pierogi, dumplings, is an old traditional cuisine I immediately associated with the recipe of my grandma. And we have typical types of pierogi for typical holidays that we would consume with different relatives. And actually, my family is very traditional. Me, being a vegetarian, I'm extremely grateful for the existence of pierogi, because in every Polish restaurant you will find some vegetarian options of pierogi, being with mushroom, cabbage, spinach, which are so popular these days, or with cottage cheese. So what I'm saying is that it is very traditional, conservative cuisine of Poland. There is still some room for me, the new vegetarian, to find something to eat. But my grandma actually can't get used to the fact that I don't eat meat anymore. But when I ask for pierogi, she's content. Well, what I'd like to say, Monica, that is that when you started talking about this return of jars in the times of the pandemic, I fully subscribe to it. I have so many jars that I would fill in with soups and with other forms of dishes. And in these difficult days of lockdown, food was a form of being in touch with other people, where friends or relatives who were infected, we would leave food in jars in front of their door. Well, I mean, everyone's tried their skills at cooking, unless they were totally hopeless, of course, then they would just order a takeaway from a restaurant. I would add here the relatives that you select yourself, meaning your friends. And you mentioned before that you organized a day of the jar in New York. And I just recalled that I read a short story by Han Maesuk, Korean writer, A Cup of Coffee, that starts with the main character who's in Seoul, and she's coming from a different place. She's looking to the fridge and she said, "Oh, I'm running out of kimchi that I brought to Seoul from home." So that goes to show that that's definitely true. And Ola, a question to you, living in Budapest, is there anything that you miss in particular? I mean, it seems that Hungarian cuisine is not that distant from the Polish one, or that you might at least buy some products there. Is there anything that you miss in particular? And something that you realize that only in another country that you miss it. What would that be? Oh, definitely there is something like that. You mentioned yourself that, well, Hungarian cuisine is quite similar to the Polish one. It's full of meat. It's quite fatty. What I miss is groats. I miss the types of groats like buckwheat, for example, or millet. And I love the groats that are so popular in Poland. That's what I miss most, in fact. But on the other hand, it is attainable in Budapest. Actually, there is a Polish store and a Polish cafe here in Budapest. It's called Gdańsk Danzig. So you can find some interesting people in there, well-literate people. And actually, you can also buy there some pierogi. So sometimes they organize special transports of pierogi, homemade pierogi, that they will bring to your home. I think that we need to slowly come to the end of this meeting, but I have kind of a metaphorical question to you, provocative as well, a little bit maybe. And it is as follows. Do you really think we need comfort food? Do we really need this type of food to comfort ourselves? Do we really need such food? And are pierogi such type of food? Well, if it exists, I think it is necessary. I believe that the reality is always right. That means if it's there, it is necessary, it is needed. Comfort food, you're right, it's hard to translate it into Polish, but it's about the food that helps you get back in touch with yourself. It soothes you, it boosts your sense of safety, especially in those difficult times. I mean, it might be your personal difficult situation or a wider situation. So comfort food will definitely soothe you and it will appeal to your senses. And by that, you can help yourself to cope with stress, for example. And of course, then you might end up with some food disorders if you consume too much. But comfort food itself, to me, is so important all over the world. It might be kimchi. It's something that restores a status that you need. I mean, if you try to break it down, what in fact does it do with you? Well, comfort food gives you the sense of safety, stability, and peace. And when I talked to people, I actually have just written a text about what Poles eat eagerly when they are outside of Poland, just like Ola. And they will eat, for example, a bread roll with cheese. They say, I need to eat a bread roll with cheese or I will go crazy. And it's not that easy to get one, even in Hungary, let alone in Asia. So in my opinion, comfort food is something that restores your sense of yourself, that strengthens your sense of being within yourself. Sorry for my philosophical approach, but that's the way I see it. Well, on YouTube or on TikTok, you see so many food creations about preparing food, consuming food. And I think that this is also about
bycia przy kimś, kto
finding
gotuje, kto coś
peace,
je, nie przez
having
jakiś
the
sposób
sense that you're
konsumowania
next to
rzeczy.
a person who is cooking or eating. It's also a different way of consuming things that you have no access to. These things are, such channels are incredibly popular these days. Me being the representative of the millennials generation, I know quite a lot about this. Or maybe not that much as the younger generation, but I've heard a lot about this. People watch and produce a lot of such content, right? And it serves not the purpose of learning a skill, but you rather should have the pleasure in watching it. Or when people record themselves while eating. Well, it strikes me as a little bit perverse, but I think we're talking here about a different level of consumerism and hedonism. I mean, this is so abstract. Or you would spray food with hairspray, hairstyling spray in order to make it look better, where food does not serve the purpose of being nourishment, but rather having different roles, different tasks, like mitigating or alleviating your anxiety or having fun. So it's not a basic need.
Antypodach.
Right. Well, what you said actually is just so far away from the film that you co-created. When you discussed what comfort food gives, it struck me that it's a different story when I go to a store and buy 10 pieces of sweets, and it's different when there's this Smitten Kitchen blogger that I love. And when Donald Trump was elected for president, she served gratin with vegetables, not to think about this, to cover up her anxiety. And many people actually say that. They say that cooking has so much in common with life, because you must get confronted with things that don't work out. It's also a test for your patience, for your skills, but also with a sense of agency and a sense of power that can also translate to different areas of your life. If you're able to peel a carrot and cook it, then maybe you can also do other things in life. And you can see the result of your work very quickly. You don't need to wait 3 days, but let's say in 2 hours' time, you will see the outcome of your work. And therefore, it's so extremely important to cook together with the children, because when you can cook, when you can plan the process and go through individual steps, and in the end, it's tasty, you like it, and your parents want to eat it, you can have some mutual joy, then it's a great learning for kids. It shows that it might be similar also in different walks of life. Food is something that connects us because we must eat. There is no other way out. It's universal. It's the most universal thing, if you will. That food or eating, that's something that is simply indispensable. Everyone must eat. And therefore,
sprawia,
food
że
can also serve as a language
prawda, że to jest
that helps you reach out to other people.
bardzo dobrego, no właśnie narzędzia
It's
do tego, żeby być bliżej z innymi ludźmi.
kind of a good tool to come closer to other people from diverse cultures and diverse generations. It's a gift, and also different personalities, right? I like to say that people have their culinary signatures. Oh, I like that. That's a good idea. Or when you teach someone or instruct someone, like my grandma would show me how to cut off pieces of dough to form pierogi. I saw this bodily memory in her. Well, my grandma is now 92 years old, and from the very childhood, she would do it in a certain repetitive way. So these are some repetitive actions that the body remembers and that the body can recreate. So she's still able to create something with her fingers, and she can teach us, her grandchildren, how to do that. And you said that yourself, the beginning of the film where the grandma and the grandson knead the dough, and the grandma does that in an amazing, beautiful way, as if her hands were just sailing, whereas the kid is more clumsy and only has to learn this certain form of dance.
Dziękuję.
I would like to thank
że
both of you.
Bardzo tutaj różne cenne
Thank you for all the
za te wszystkie rzeczy, dziękuję,
precious
które przyniosłyście do
insights
naszego
that you shared with us
stołu. I myślę, że
during this discussion at this table. Together we have just created a very interesting piece of dumpling with some interesting filling, metaphorically speaking.
wszystkie są jakieś bardzo takie
And I think that even if not all of the pierogi are sweet,
i świadomość,
they
którą warto
all form
mieć.
part of a certain set of knowledge in that regard that we want to have. Thank you very much. Those of you who haven't seen the film, feel free to watch it. And I would like to thank Goethe Institute for hosting us.
No i zapraszam też do robienia jedzenia samodzielnie i do tego, żeby
Thank you very much as well. And I really encourage you to cook by yourselves. You can ask your grandma for advice and you can cook together, because really there are most beautiful things that come out of such cooperation. Thank you very much.